Education on AMEInfo, and alongside Better Middle East, we're taking a look at the future development of private education across the Middle East with an analysis of a report which has been published. So, Robert, key areas here in the Middle East for private education, Saudi Arabia and UAE, I suppose.
Well, Saudi Arabia and the UAE only in so much as that they represent large opportunities. If you think about it, the entire region actually exhibits the dynamics by which private education in the K-12 space and the post-secondary space can be very valuable. You've got rising incomes, you have a public system that is always strained by definition, you have parents who are seeking further educational opportunities for their children. And so those drive the market. But that you find that in Oman, you find that in the UAE, you find that in Saudi Arabia. Those two just happen to be the biggest.
So traditionally education in this part of the world has been provided, it's been supplied by the government sector, and with their diversification plans they're trying to bring in the public sector in all sorts of aspects. So what's going to be the key role then in the private sector within education in the regions we're talking about?
So the key role for private sector education is to really offer an alternative pathway for parents and students to realize their educational objectives. It does not ever have to be in conflict with public education. In fact, a well-functioning system blends all of the above.
A duo system, yeah.
Exactly, a dual system. And in fact, in many places you can see that private education, because it's often better funded because of the private tuition rules, can play an interesting role in helping drive reforms and show the way for the public sector education to move forward.
So looking at the evolution of private education, I suppose, would there be two parts, like the infrastructure, the actual properties for the various education establishments, then the actual setting up and the management and running of those schools and colleges? Yeah,
absolutely. You often find that investors in the space want to separate out the property development or the property company from the operating aspects of the education. And especially in the Middle East, often the property development aspect is done through education cities or other sort of large infrastructure projects where an educational institution is a foundational part of it.
And in terms of getting the investment, where do you see that primarily coming from?
So typically the investments come out of the private equity community, obviously with an element of with debt as well. But when you look around the world, even at the operating companies, so the big global chains like the Cognitas, the Nord Anglias, the Beacon Houses, they are often private equity backed. And that's because you have to tap into the market to have the funds available in order to build and run schools.
And what sort of figures would we be looking at for developments over the next 15 to 20 years?
15 to 20 years, it could be quite substantial. From our perspective, there's literally the opportunity for billions of dollars of investment to go into the region, strictly behind education on the private sector side. What's required for that, obviously, is a good market environment for investors to see, which absolutely exists, and then a solid regulatory framework so that they can have a fundamental belief that they can operate in a very clean and clear process for the next couple of years.
I say 15 to 20 years because, like Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, a young population, they're going to be maturing, getting married, having children, so there will be quite a large population growth in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
But what's interesting, when you look at private schooling, population growth, with rare exception, is not what drives the market. It's income growth and aspirations. It's supply-demand inequalities between what parents and students are looking for, parents in that part of K through 12, and students in the part of university, and what's available out there. So it's income growth and participation rate growth that really drives the market.
And what sort of returns do you think investors could expect embracing private education in the Middle East?
It really depends on how they separate the property and the operating structures. Property structures tend to return property level types of returns, which is much lower than a private equity on an operating company. An operating company can see very substantial internal returns on their investments.
So when you say substantial, you can't sort of give a ballpark figure, perhaps?
Well, it's all quite differential, but certainly well in excess of what a private equity firm would often say what they want in terms of their return on investment. So north of 25 to 35%.
Very interesting. And to finish off, how attractive is the Middle East compared with other parts of the world, other developing regions?
Arguably in the K-12 space, it's one of the most attractive spots on the planet, simply because of the supply-demand inequality and the rising income rates.
Fascinating insight, Robert, and I'd like to thank you very much for joining us here on AMEInfo.
Our pleasure.
Thanks very much.